Balake. Where is Balake at?
My name's Blake.
Do you want to go to war, Balake? I'm for real. Ron.
Hey everyone, welcome back for more SPTV, where every day is a great day not to be in a cult. I've been having so much fun with this Pat Broeker subject, just jumping right into it. I watched for the first time a couple days ago the event that was held January 27th, 2006, announcing that L. Ron Hubbard had passed on from this dimension. He had dropped his body. He had moved off to Target 2. It was the event announcing that L. Ron Hubbard had died. I had never seen the entire event. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long. I uploaded a version of it to my channel with chapter breaks and some explanations of things at the bottom of the screen. And the star of the event really was a man by the name of Pat Broeker, a man who, by all accounts, was supposed to be the person to take over running Scientology, not David Miscavige. I think the fact that Pat Broeker was the star of this event and was introduced at this event by David Miscavige as one of L. Ron Hubbard's two closest friends, and one of the people who had been with L. Ron Hubbard for the last 6 years of his life when he was off in seclusion. Oh, better put that on Do Not Disturb. I think the fact that Pat Broeker was introduced in that way at this event, and that David Miscavige was not announced at this event as being the successor of L. Ron Hubbard as the person to run Scientology, is why David Miscavige, this event does not exist in Scientology. In the 30 years I spent in Scientology, I did not know of the existence of the recording of this event. I had never seen the event. And I imagine that Pat Broeker's prominence in this event is one of the reasons David Miscavige does not want Scientologists to see the event video, which is one of the reasons I took great pleasure in uploading a fresh copy of it to my channel. I uploaded the video, then I did a reaction video to it yesterday, and I got a lot of questions in the comments section saying, do you think David Miscavige has Pat Broeker monitored, surveilled? And I said, not only do I think he does, but the private investigators who'd been following Pat Broeker for over 25 years spoke to the press once Scientology stopped paying them. And that is the article that I actually want to share with you guys today. It's an article I couldn't even believe. I was shocked when I looked this article up and saw that it was actually written 11 years ago. It seems like it was just yesterday. And I want to share it with you. It's not a very long article, but it is incredibly interesting. Okay, let's see. I feel like I'm forgetting something, though. I don't know. I can't shake the feeling that I'm forgetting something. I guess we'll find out. Okay, so this was written by the Tampa Bay Times. It was either Joe Childs, Tom Tobin. Let me see. Go all the way to the end, and we'll get there. This is an article from the Tampa Bay Times titled, "Two Detectives Describe Their 2-Decade Pursuit of an Exiled Scientology Leader." That's the man himself, Pat Broeker, you guys. Oh, Tom Tobin. Okay, Tom Tobin wrote this. San Antonio, Texas, nearly 25 years ago, Scientology hired 2 former California cops to do a job, spy on Patrick D. Broeker. Uh-oh, have I been spelling Broeker wrong? Oh, now I got to double check. Okay, Scientology officials painted Pat Broeker as an errand boy for the late Scientology founder, L. Ron Hubbard. Well, I've got some stuff queued up to share with you guys. For those of you who haven't already seen all the other videos, I want to show you in this video an errand boy. Pat Broeker was an errand boy. Let me show you how David Miscavige himself introduced Pat Broeker at the event where L. Ron Hubbard's death was announced. Here we go.
When LRH left in 1980 to do his researches, he took with him his 2 most trusted friends and companions. These 2 people were Pat Broeker and Annie Broeker. They lived and worked with him for the last 6 years during the time period of this research. And this evening, Pat Broeker is here to speak to you in regards to that. Please welcome him.
Okay, good. Then Pat Broeker comes on stage. I've got another section I'm going to share with you where Pat Broeker, after discussing OT 9 and 10 at some length, basically says he's in possession of OT 9 and 10. And then he goes on to explain his role. Well, he says OT 9 and 10 is done, is finished. He doesn't actually go into the details that David Miscavige and management doesn't have it. He personally is in possession of it because that's what he was claiming. It turned out not to be true. Because OT 9 and 10 don't exist. But then he goes on to say it is his job to compile the upper OT levels beyond OT 9 and 10, according to L. Ron Hubbard's notes. This is pretty fascinating. And check this out.
OT 9 and OT 10 are also written up.
Jesus, sorry, I didn't realize I had that on 2x speed. Here we go.
And OT 10 are also written up. OT 9 and OT 10 are also written up. Finished. There are several other OT levels that it is my job to compile. It consists of taking what he has written and putting it essentially in paragraph form, adding the appropriate HCOB references that go along with the auditing necessary to do this particular level, and they'll be released in due course.
Spoiler alert, they were never released because they do not exist. But it is amazing to see Scientology characterize the guy who was with L. Ron Hubbard for his final 6 years, the guy who was supposedly in possession of OT 9 and 10, and the guy who on stage to all Scientologists said it was his job to compile OT 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. The Scientology bridge goes up to 15, OT 15, on any version of the bridge that you can find today. Obviously, the implication is the reason the bridge goes to OT 15 is that that's what L. Ron Hubbard wrote up, even if not in final form, before he died. Okay. But he was just an errand boy. All right, back to the article. Scientology officials painted Pat Broeker as an errand boy for the late Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. They said he had made off with $1.8 million and a cache of critically important Hubbard records. Follow Pat Broeker, they said. Watch him every minute, report back frequently. The private eyes did. Beginning in 1988 and continuing for a quarter of a century, Paul Merrick and Greg Arnold tracked Pat Broeker from a California apartment to a cowboy town in Wyoming and even to the Czech Republic. I think yesterday I said that I thought they had followed him to Croatia. I stand corrected. They spied on Pat Broeker's girlfriends, rifled through his garbage, listened to his phone calls. After 14 months, high-ranking church official Marty Rathman told the PIs that they had performed so well that Scientology would have work for them for the rest of their careers. They were part of the family, Marty Rathman told them. Scientology started paying them $32,000 a month. We thought, well, that sounds like a pretty good deal, said Merrick, and the checks kept coming until this summer. Now, that would have been this summer 11 years ago, when Scientology stopped paying them. Now the PIs are suing Scientology, claiming that Scientology and its leader, David Miscavige, violated their long ago verbal deal. In a 3-hour interview with the Tampa Bay Times, in the office of their Texas lawyer, Ray Jeffrey, the investigators shared details of their top secret work. They told a rollicking tale of espionage and described the expense to which Scientology went to gather intelligence on real and perceived enemies. The investigators' lawyer said Scientology paid the PIs between $10 and $12 million. In addition to Pat Broeker, they followed several other Scientology targets, including a drug company executive who is now governor of Indiana, Mitch Daniels. It is just amazing that Scientology would claim Pat Broeker was an errand boy, while also basically having to admit eventually that they spent 25 years and $12 million to follow and surveil this errand boy. I dare say that is one important errand boy. Okay. Brazen and invasive, the operations were financed by money from Scientology parishioners. The payments to the two detectives always stopped short of the $10,000 threshold that triggers notifications to the IRS. Responding to questions from the Tampa Bay Times, Scientology acknowledged that the men provided various services as independent contractors, but spokeswoman Corinne Powell described the lawsuit, the PI's lawsuit, as nothing more than a transparent shakedown effort. How stupid do you have to be? We see over and over again how Scientology makes its own enemies. It really creates all of its own problems. How stupid do you have to be to screw over the two PIs who have for 25 years been following probably one of the only people around other than Tom Cruise who could actually take down Scientology? If Pat Broeker spoke out publicly, wrote a book, whatever, told the actual true tale of the last 6 years of L. Ron Hubbard's life, told the true story of OT 9 and 10 and how they don't exist, and told the story of how David Miscavige really came to power, I truly believe that Pat Broeker could take down Scientology. Similarly speaking, the only other person that I believe has that similar kind of power is Tom Cruise. If Tom Cruise left Scientology, that would effectively take down Scientology. Okay, Corinne Powell characterized virtually their entire narrative, their tales of following Pat Broeker, the sums they were paid, their accounts of dealings with Scientology officials as inaccurate without giving specifics. The investigators never met David Miscavige, but they say they were told that he was calling the shots. Corinne Powell says that Scientology lawyers supervised the private investigators and that David Miscavige had no involvement. Any allegations to the contrary are malicious fabrications and complete balderdash, Corinne Powell said. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, a Scientology spokesperson actually used the word balderdash in an official quote to a respected media organization. All right, what else do we have here? On Wednesday, the men said that they kept notes, emails, audio tapes, and photos documenting their pursuit of Pat Broeker. The Tampa Bay Times asked for the materials, and the PIs said they would consider the request. Hours later, settlement talks began, and they declined further contact with the newspaper. It was amazing to see over like a 2 or 3 day period, these PIs gave interviews to multiple media outlets. And I think they knew damn well what they were going to get. I mean, they were just trying to be as much of a nightmare for Scientology in as short of a time as possible so that Scientology would come with a big, fat, giant check and say, okay, we messed up. Okay, we messed up. We apologize. Please go back into hiding. Please never speak of any of this again. The damage had already been done. This is what I mean. Like, how stupid do you have to be? I have no doubt whatsoever that these PIs, they did not just go immediately to the press and start speaking about the organization that had been paying them $12 million over the last 25 years. I bet they tried pretty hard to continue to get paid before going to the press. And yet going to the press is what it took to bring Scientology to the table and to pay these men what they had been promised, which was to basically have a paycheck for the rest of their career. Okay. Oh, yeah. So in other words, once Scientology came and paid them, they stopped talking. The men do not deny that they had an unusual run. Apparently afraid of eavesdropping, Scientology insisted that they report back in coded language. Both sides called David Miscavige the Duke. They called Pat Broeker the Guy, and they later called him the Gardner because he liked to bury things. Okay, Mike Rinder has also told this story of how much Pat Broeker liked to bury things. They would use when L. Ron Hubbard was still alive, and they would Pat Broeker would go and meet David Miscavige places, and Pat Broeker was very paranoid of being followed and surveilled, and he would if I recall the story correctly, he wouldn't just get rid of cars, he would bury them. He would use like a giant what do they call them, a front loader or whatever, and dig giant holes in the Creston ranch where LRH lived, and bury vehicles. It sounds like a bit of a fetish. The detectives know where Pat Broeker is, but they aren't saying. They also came to discover something else. Pat Broeker was no errand boy. L. Ron Hubbard spent the last years of his life moving around Southern California with Pat Broeker, Pat Broeker's wife Annie with Pat Broeker and his wife Annie as his primary companions. In 1983, they settled at a 160-acre ranch in Creston, California, about 300 miles north of Scientology's international management base near Los Angeles. I want to show you guys, for those of you who are not yet familiar, the precise location of Scientology's supposed to be secretive international management base in Riverside County, California, and also the location of the Creston Ranch, which is now one of the secret underground vaults operated by a Scientology subsidiary called Church of Spiritual Technology. Okay, so we got a map here. Gilman Hot Springs. Let me see if I can actually do this correctly. Gilman Hot Springs, California is in fact Scientology's international management base. Now, it has been said that David Miscavige doesn't actually live or work here anymore. He's relocated to Hollywood, California permanently, works out of Scientology Media Productions. Scientology's international management structure has largely been dismantled and ceases to exist. But if you look up Gilman Hot Springs, the property north and south of this freeway is Scientology's international management base. This big structure right here is the castle of Golden Era Productions. That's basically a giant studio. They call it a soundstage, I guess. And the north side of the base, I believe, was really where international management itself was located. This giant mansion right here, this was built when L. Ron Hubbard was very paranoid that David Miscavige was very paranoid that L. Ron Hubbard was supposed to come back, reincarnate about 18 to 21 years after he died. So he had this structure raised and rebuilt. Literally, this is a home for a man who's been dead since 1986. That is called Bonneview. This private office building that David Miscavige had built for his own personal use for the low cost of $50 million. It's called Building 51. I guess Scientology never predicted Google Maps and Google Satellite View. Okay, so that is Scientology's international management base. You can literally drive by it on the freeway. Now, let's go to L. Ron Hubbard's, the ranch that L. Ron Hubbard died on. The easiest way to find it on a map is to search, oh, good Lord, is to search Granite Ridge Christian Camp. It's northeast of San Luis Obispo. And just keep zooming in on it. And you see this symbol over here, these two intersecting circles with diamonds in them that can only be seen from the sky. That is the symbol for the organization, CST, Church of Spiritual Technology. All of Scientology's secret underground nuclear-proof vaults are marked with this symbol. These vaults always have a caretaker house next to them. I'm guessing that is not it. I'm guessing that is this is more likely to be the actual caretaker house. And this is the horse ranch that L. Ron Hubbard was on for the years of his life. It's reported that he died in a Bluebird motorhome, but the motorhome was parked on the horse ranch. Okay, back to the article, folks. Okay, at the time, Scientology was at war with the IRS over losing its tax-exempt status. Scientology was a defendant in numerous lawsuits and was still reeling from a scandal that saw 11 Scientology members, including L. Ron Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue, convicted of obstruction of justice and conspiracy. At the ranch, L. Ron Hubbard went into self-imposed exile. His chief conduit to the outside world was Pat Broeker. Pat Broeker grew up near Niagara Falls and joined Scientology as a young man. He demanded tight security, said Steve Fouth. Okay, so Steve was one of the few people who had direct contact with L. Ron Hubbard during those last 6 years. His friends called him Sarge. I guess I'm just going to call him Steve, though, whatever they call him in this article. Steve, a former church staff member who worked as the ranch's chief caretaker. He also brought in truckloads of animals, horses, cows, buffaloes, geese, ducks, chickens, and llamas. Pat Broeker spent money like water Sarge said. He had access to as much money as he wanted. After L. Ron Hubbard died in 86, Scientology officers began to cut off Pat Broeker's funds and demand that he keep a better accounting, Sarge said. Pat did not like doing accounting. Then there was a question of who would succeed L. Ron Hubbard, the founder. A signed L. Ron Hubbard order appeared to elevate Pat and Annie Broeker to the status of loyal officers, outranking everyone else. But Scientology canceled the document, saying L. Ron Hubbard never wrote it or saw it. David Miscavige, then only 26 years old, emerged as the leader. It is interesting to note that David Miscavige, who had no direct contact with L. Ron Hubbard for the final 6 years of his life, nor did anyone else other than Pat Broeker, Annie Broeker, Sarge, Dr. Eugene Denk, and Ray Midoff, no one on the Scientology side of the equation would have any idea of knowing whether L. Ron Hubbard actually knew of, approved, saw, or wrote the order elevating Pat and Annie to the status of loyal officers. But the only thing David Miscavige would know is that he could never allow such a thing to occur, or never allow Scientologists to believe that such a thing had occurred if he, David Miscavige, had any chance of taking over full control of Scientology. All of this took 2 years to play out. Eventually, Annie Broeker moved to the international base, and the couple separated. Pat Broeker, then about 40 years old, moved on. As Pat Broeker gradually moved his belongings to an apartment in Paso Robles, the PIs joined a team of 6 PIs who watched for traces of the $1.8 million, or the never-before-seen writings by L. Ron Hubbard. Marty Rathbun, David Miscavige's top deputy, called constantly for updates. This is interesting evidence, even in this article, that David Miscavige, at the time of L. Ron Hubbard's death, had no knowledge of or possession of the upper unreleased OT levels, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15. Miscavige didn't have them. That's why they had to follow Pat Broeker for 25 years. They had to know what happened to the upper OT levels that L. Ron Hubbard claimed existed and Pat Broeker claimed existed, and Scientologists believed existed. It was clear to the detectives that Pat Broeker knew how to fly under the radar. He didn't have utility accounts in his name. Magazine subscriptions came to Mike Walters or Mike Mitchell. The men learned that even L. Ron Hubbard called Pat Broeker 007. He had the innate ability to hide in plain sight and not be found. It kept them on their toes. If anything came up, the investigators were to call a special line at the international base. A sensor placed on Pat Broeker's Scientology-owned truck helped track his movements. When Pat left the ranch, Scientology hands radioed to tell the private investigators in code, Joe is going to St. Louis. When Pat returned, they reported, the chicken is in the coop. The PIs rented the unit next to Pat Broeker's apartment and outfitted it with surveillance gear. They got Merrick's father to befriend Pat Broeker and give him a mobile phone, the vintage 1980s kind that could easily and legally be monitored with a police scanner. They listened to Pat's conversations, followed him on dates with a local veterinarian, tailed him to classes at a nearby college in San Luis Obispo. They listened to a phone call from Gerald Pfeffer, one of Scientology's Washington, D.C. lawyers. Pfeffer wanted Broeker to hand over Scientology's pickup truck. Pat expressed anger at being pushed aside in a hostile takeover. He said if he had money, he would use it to regain his position in Scientology, but was conflicted because he did not want to hurt any of his friends still inside. He vowed to continue Hubbard's research on his own. That's interesting. Through it all, the detectives saw little evidence that Pat Broeker had either money or important church documents, but they came to know intimate details about his life. By listening to his phone calls, they knew his relationship with the veterinarian was headed for a breakup. In late 1989, Pat Broeker packed up a rider van and left town, which meant that the PIs would have to relocate too. The Scientology checks kept coming. The PIs suspected Pat Broeker was headed to his parents' house in Wyoming. The 2 PIs looked nothing like the cowboys in Cheyenne. They blended in by growing beards. Merrick became a real estate appraiser on the side because it gave him a good cover story. They made a deal with a local trash hauler to get access to Pat's garbage, an arrangement they said is common in the disposal industry. It's valuable. We know exactly how you're living your life. Many times that they sorted through Pat's trash, they found empty plastic bags caked in mud as if they had been buried in the ground. It appeared that he had dug up the bags, but the investigators never knew what had been inside them. They chuckle at television portrayals of private investigators who camp out in front of homes and tail people closely. The best way to follow somebody is not to follow them at all, to know where they're going ahead of time or to have a pretty good idea of it. The investigators say it appeared that Pat never realized he was being followed. From a distance, they would use spotting scopes to watch Pat come and go from his parents' house. They followed him to a local college and discovered he was taking classes in biology. He got a job at a hospital in Fort Collins, Colorado, about 50 miles south of Cheyenne. They saw him strike up a relationship with a new girlfriend, and they knew when he slept over. In June 1990, the LA Times published a 6-day series on Scientology that showed Pat Broeker had enjoyed a much higher standing in Scientology than the PIs had been led to believe. The so-called errand boy had actually been a rival of David Miscavige in a power struggle over L. Ron Hubbard's writings. Over time, they would learn much more about Pat Broeker's influence. In the last years of L. Ron Hubbard's life, Pat had kept the founder safely secluded. The trust L. Ron Hubbard placed in him was a privilege few others enjoyed. It had been Pat Broeker who carried L. Ron Hubbard's voice to Scientology, and he had been one of the key speakers announcing L. Ron Hubbard's death. What made Pat Broeker important later was the possibility that he possessed original writings L. Ron Hubbard had produced while in isolation. There was a concern that materials from L. Ron Hubbard may have been taken. Oh, wow. Corinne Powell actually admitted that. This is a quote from Corinne Powell. There was concern that materials from the founder may have been taken to the church. Those materials are priceless. Yeah, I would say so, since David Miscavige tells all the Scientologists in the world that OT 9 and 10 is right around the corner and can possibly be released next year. OT 9 and 10 doesn't exist. This is why I'm going to keep talking about Pat Broeker, guys. I am so in love with this with this event video of L. Ron Hubbard's funeral and Pat Broeker's prominence in it. This is one of those things that if Scientologists became aware of it, became aware of who Pat Broeker was, what he did, what his role was, what David Miscavige introduced him as, what he claimed, that he basically, OT 9 and 10 was ready to go, and that it was Pat Broeker's job to compile the upper OT levels. If I'm a Scientologist still inside the bubble, and I find out that the guy whose job it was allegedly to compile the upper unreleased OT levels has left Scientology, and David Miscavige spent $12 million to follow him for 25 years, I'm going to start asking some questions, even if I'm only asking those questions to myself. Guys, Scientologists' belief in the upper unreleased OT levels is, to a significant degree, what keeps people in Scientology. And I know I had always wondered, when I was, still a true believer, one of the things that started to shake the foundation of my belief a little bit was when these high level executives started to defect. And it wasn't just, oh no, maybe they know something that I don't know. It was, wait a second. We as Scientologists have a particular belief in what the upper OT levels are, what they mean, what they represent, their importance to all of humankind. It would be almost impossible if what Scientologists believe about those levels, if what they believe about those levels were true, it would be impossible to be exposed to those levels, do those levels, experience the gain of those levels, have achieved the benefits you're supposed to achieve from those levels, and to leave Scientology for any reason, especially willingly, like to escape, to blow. You could be kicked out of Scientology, but if you really believe in those levels and you've done them and you know what's on them, you could never leave Scientology willingly, no matter how horrible David Miscavige was. So when I started to see people like Mike Rinder, like Debbie Cook, like Marty Rathbun leaving Scientology, that's why that affected me. It's like, wait a second. And to have found out that they all escaped. They all escaped from Scientology. They were not kicked out. And you go, wait, escape? How could that even be an option? How could one ever go down that road if they've done the OT levels and they know what's on them? So anyway, I feel like I'm being a little long-winded about this, but the fact that Pat Broeker, with David Miscavige present at L. Ron Hubbard's funeral, said OT 9 and 10 are ready to go, showed worksheets from L. Ron Hubbard's OT 10 sessions, allegedly, which implies Pat Broeker had possibly himself done OT10, and then said it was his job to compile all the upper OT levels. Guys, that guy's out of Scientology. He's still alive. He's out there. And there's a reason David Miscavige spent $12 million having him followed for 25 years. Okay. That portrayal of Pat Broeker made more sense, the PI said, because who would watch a houseboy, even for that period of time, unless he was a much bigger threat or more valuable in some other fashion? It blew us away. 2 years into their assignment, both men began to believe that Scientology considered Pat Broeker to be a threat to David Miscavige's leadership. Scientology denies David Miscavige's authority was ever in question. That's the other reason why I'm so excited to have finally seen the content of this L. Ron Hubbard death announcement video. If David Miscavige had been selected by L. Ron Hubbard to take over control of Scientology, I promise you that would have been part of the announcement at the event where they were announcing L. Ron Hubbard died. And it wasn't. Okay, the private detectives also came to think about Pat Broeker in a new way. He went to school. He held down jobs. He lived modestly. He treated his female companions honorably. People enjoyed his company. None of that changed how they viewed their job, they said. They weren't Scientologists, but they sympathized with the notion that an underdog church was fighting for its religious freedom, and the work also paid the bills. We felt good about doing what we were doing because we thought we were doing the church a service. Along the way, they helped with other investigations. Scientology was in a bitter fight with Eli Lilly and Company, makers of Prozac. Scientology opposes using drugs to treat mental conditions. Mitch Daniels, then a top Eli Lilly executive, had said Scientology is no church. The PIs staked out Daniels' house in Indianapolis and took down the tag numbers of his visitors. We saw him watching TV through his front window. We watched his daughters. They were young then. It was everyday living. Nothing came of the investigation. Daniels' press aide said last week the governor had no comment about the surveillance. Corinne Powell also declined to comment. Every month, Scientology sent $32,000 in cashier's checks to the investigators' Wyoming P.O. box. Both men's pay and expenses came out of that. Then one day, everything changed. Pat Broeker left Cheyenne in the middle of the night, and they had no idea where he was. They searched the garbage of Pat's girlfriend in Fort Collins. They found a scrap paper with an address scrawled on it. God, what are the chances? He had moved 500 miles east to Council Bluffs, Iowa. He was attending Creighton University School of Medicine in the neighboring Omaha, the investigators said. 2 years later, he suddenly stopped going to school and began to engage in what his followers termed covert behavior. They found indications in his trash that he was using aliases, buying security encryption software. He was in contact with former church spokesman Robert Vaughn Young, who had become a vocal critic. Meanwhile, anti-Scientology sentiment was heating up on the internet. Was it luring Pat Broeker in? Was he plotting a return? Maybe he was going back into his 007 mode. Through information brokers, the PIs obtained Pat's phone records, an action that they said falls into a gray area and would not be legal today. They spotted a phone call to an Ohio hotel where several high-profile Scientology critics had met. Well, these guys are good at their job. Later, they returned to Cheyenne following a tip that Broeker and Young would be meeting there. The PIs followed the men to an Applebee's restaurant where Arnold disguised himself and sat behind them in the next booth. He heard them talking critically about David Miscavige and Scientology. Wow. I forgot how good this article was. Obviously, the church was still on their mind, and Pat was pretty angry. Pat Broeker's involvement with the dissidents was short-lived. He moved to the Czech Republic. Wow. Now I got to tell you, I'm in pure speculation land. Pure speculation land here. It would not surprise me if Scientology was dealing with Pat Broeker separately to what the private detectives were doing. Pure speculation. I'm just telling you, this is the impression I'm getting from what I'm reading here. It would not surprise me if the PI's daily reports to David Miscavige about Pat Broeker now engaging in very suspicious activity, dealing with seemingly in contact with Scientology critics for the first time in years, if that prompted David Miscavige to separately contact Pat Broeker and offer him a shitload of money to get out of the country. What do you guys think? Is that possible? Seems very possible. Okay. At Scientology's direction, the PIs worked on other investigations in the United States while keeping tabs on Broeker from afar using foreign detectives. Scientology officials reduced their payments. I don't know, guys. I think these PIs up to this point have done a stellar and spectacular job. It seems that maybe Scientology was like, we don't need to use these resources on Pat because we know exactly what he's doing. We know exactly where he is. We'll use other resources because we're the one who paid him to get out of the country. Just a guess. Okay, the men said that Pat Broeker spent nearly 10 years in the Czech Republic, going to medical school, working as an English teacher, and as a medical transcriber. Wow. He lived modestly and stayed busy. By the time he returned to the U.S. in late 2007, Merrick and Arnold were sensing upheaval in the world of Scientology. The church's longtime spokesman, Mike Rinder, had left staff that year, and Marty Rathbun had walked away in 2004. Both men kept low profiles, but other defectors were beginning to speak out, including David Miscavige's niece, Jenna Miscavige, and actor Jason Begay. It was just like rapid fire, one thing after another. They saw the potential for a perfect storm. If Marty Rathbun, Mike Rinder, and Pat Broeker ever got together to challenge David Miscavige, they said they warned the church. In 2009, Marty Rathbun, Mike Rinder, and dozens of other defectors spoke to the Tampa Bay Times, telling of violence and abuse at the hands of David Miscavige, charges that Scientology denied. Also, among Marty Rathbun's revelations, a pair of church investigators had tailed Pat Broeker for more than 2 decades. Marty Rathbun spilled the goods. After all the years the detectives had spent living in secret and leading double lives, Marty Rathbun, of all people, had blown their cover. Still, they continued to keep an eye on Pat Broeker while also helping to surveil Marty Rathbun and Mike Rinder. The church increased their pay to $9,600 a week, or about $500K a year for both of them, which included expenses. Said Merrick, we were sitting here thinking, wait a second, so now we're going to surveil the guy that hired us? This is not what we really hired on for. Everything has changed. Spokeswoman Corinne Powell said the spokeswoman Powell said the church, Scientology seeks intelligence on Marty Rathbun and Mike Rinder because it has an ongoing program to eliminate all relationships with people who worked with or were associated with them. Wait, she admitted that? Let me read this again, exactly as it's written. Spokeswoman Powell said the church seeks intelligence on Rathbun and Rinder because it has an ongoing program to eliminate all relationships with people who worked with or were associated with them. That is a shocking admission from a Scientology spokesperson. The detectives traveled to Marty Rathbun's neighborhood near Corpus Christi, Texas, to help Scientology plot a strategy for following him. They went through Mike Rinder's trash and rented a place near his Denver apartment, setting up a camera with night vision and remote controls. Unbelievable. It allowed them to keep an eye on Mike Rinder while simultaneously watching Pat Broeker in a city that they declined to name. Unbelievable. Here we were watching these 3 people, all spies in their own right. So we had to be ultra careful. They said they were bothered when Scientology set out to overtly harass Marty Rathbun by constantly tailing and videotaping him and camping outside his house. And they did not like Scientology's furious reaction when Mike Rinder wrote to his mother, who was still a Scientologist. A guy couldn't write to his own mother? And now that the Pat Broeker operation had been exposed, they got discouraging signals from Scientology. Their contact, Linda Hamill, told them at one point, we're not sure what the Duke is going to do. In other words, we're not sure what Miscavige is going to do. My heart dropped, Arnold said. Would Scientology really cut them loose? Like Merrick, Arnold is 53 years old, married with 2 kids. I was working on my honeymoon, and I've missed some Christmases, Merrick said. Nobody knew what we did. Family members, my mother, my brother, they to this day don't know who I worked for. They knew I was a private investigator, but that was the extent of it. They said Scientology stopped their payments this spring. Meantime, they say 007 lives quietly somewhere in the United States. He is 64 years old. Well, this was 11 years ago, guys. So Pat Broeker is 75 years old. The Tampa Bay Times couldn't find Pat Broeker, but his sister, Penny Byers of Cheyenne, said that she would pass on a message. But she added, He just wants to be left alone. Oh, God, I wish Pat Broeker would speak out. I wish Pat Broeker would just sit down. You know, I mean, I wish he would even document some stuff. Do some self-recorded videotapes, maybe for release after his death. You know, if he just doesn't want the fight, doesn't want the drama. What's interesting is that, in my opinion, though, he wouldn't have a fight. I don't know. Am I being too naive? After Scientology went after Debbie Cook, and again, this was what, also around 11 or 12 years ago or something. After Scientology went after Debbie Cook and tried to file get an injunction against her to keep her from speaking publicly about what she knew about David Miscavige. And Debbie Cook spent a couple days on the stand testifying, not in a lawsuit, but just for the hearing regarding the injunction. She got on the stand and for a couple days said just some of what she knows about David Miscavige and some of her unbelievably horrific abusive experiences at the hands of David Miscavige at the international base. That was the last time Scientology's gone after anybody. They ended up paying Debbie Cook allegedly millions of dollars to just go away, be quiet, leave the country. And then she came back eventually, but she doesn't speak publicly against Scientology. And, and that was Debbie Cook, who compared to Pat Broeker was a relatively low-level Sea Org member. Now, no Scientologist would ever actually describe Debbie Cook as a low-level Sea Org member. But compared to Pat Broeker, she could be described that way. I guess what I'm saying is, I think if Pat Broeker decided to speak out publicly, or just write a book, or I don't know, just do YouTube videos, I don't think Scientology could afford to go after him. Now, you could make the other argument. Could they afford not to go after him? I don't know. Maybe I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about it. I just really, really feel that they could not afford the fallout of going after him. Going after him makes him seem important. If you totally ignore him, you can write him off as a crackpot. I don't know. Some of the stuff Scientology does, a lot of the stuff Scientology does, doesn't necessarily make any sense, especially when it comes to the harassment legal side of things. In many ways, it seems like a lot of the stuff they do because they can't help it. Like they kind of have to. They have to be able to tell Miscavige that they're doing something. So better to do something stupid than to do nothing. I don't know. I don't know. It would be amazing. I do think that if Pat Broeker spoke publicly, he would be responsible for an awful lot of people leaving Scientology. There's always going to be a certain amount of people in Scientology who it doesn't matter what you say, it doesn't matter what you show them, they'll never believe anything other than what David Miscavige tells them to believe or what they believe L. Ron Hubbard is telling them to believe. I mean, that's just the nature of being in a cult. But nonetheless, guys, if Pat Broeker spoke publicly, extensively, at length, in painful detail, the kind of stuff you can do at your own pace on YouTube. Oh my God. So many people would wake up and leave Scientology. All right, guys, let's see. I got some starred comments here. Amanda, did Pat and Annie have kids? I don't think Pat and Annie had kids, but I do believe Pat has at least one offspring who would have never been in Scientology. Dave Owens, it would be awesome if Pat suddenly found OT 9 and 10. Yes. Matt Elliott, was Annie also followed or was she stuck at Gold? Annie tried to escape. Marty Rathbun intercepted her at an airport, convinced her to come back to the international base where she worked until the end of her life. She died of cancer. At the very, very end of her life, she was moved to an apartment across the street from the Celebrity Center where she died. And that was a number of years ago. Yep. I mean, there's questions that I have that I don't know. I cannot wrap my mind around the fact that Annie Broeker, by the way, from what I've been told, it's Annie who L. Ron Hubbard actually liked and trusted. I'm told L. Ron Hubbard didn't really like Pat that much. Pat, and this is actually probably where Scientology gets away with trying to call him an errand boy. That L. Ron Hubbard really did kind of use Pat as the errand boy and Annie as his actual friend and confidant. Which then does beg the question, if the order from L. Ron Hubbard appointing Pat and Annie loyal officers, why would he appoint Pat as the first loyal officer and Annie as the second loyal officer? You'd think it'd be the other way around. L. Ron Hubbard really did seem to prefer putting women in positions of power for the most part. A majority of the Scientology executives at the international level are women. And I guess that might also call into question the validity of that order. Why would he put Pat over Annie? Why was I saying that? I forget. Oh, was Annie followed? Oh, yeah. I have no idea how someone like Annie, who was so close to L. Ron Hubbard, could stay at the international base working at a low-level position at Golden Arrow Productions for all those years under David Miscavige. When she knew the truth, she would have known the truth about L. Ron Hubbard's physical state when he died. She would have known the truth about Miscavige not really being selected to take over Scientology. You could also argue she didn't care. She wasn't in it for the glory. She wasn't in it for power. And you could maybe make the argument, the same argument that gets made for Shelley Miscavige, that she wanted to stay because she actually believed L. Ron Hubbard was coming back. But then why did Pat leave? You know, because also Pat and Annie were married for a long time. So how did they come to be of two completely different minds with respect to L. Ron Hubbard or with respect to Scientology? These are questions I would love the opportunity to hear answers to. We'll never get those answers from Annie, unfortunately. Dave Owens, I follow all of Aaron's videos. Will Osa pay me for that? Good one. Waspier. Waspier. Good to see you, Waspier. Have a great day, Aaron. Have a great day, Waspier. Power Lies to Paralyze. The law firm that registered the CST logo is in Malvern, PA, just outside of Philadelphia. Wow. Malvern, PA is where I say I mostly grew up. I moved from Haddonfield. I went to like the early grade school, kindergarten through third grade in Haddonfield, New Jersey. And then I did fourth grade through the sixth grade in Malvern, PA. And I wonder if Bert Kreischer might also be from Malvern. Did you guys know Bert Kreischer's dad was a lawyer who worked for Scientology? I wonder if Bert Kreischer's dad had anything to do with the firm that registered the CST logo. You know, the funny thing about the CST logo is it is also almost identical to the logo of L. Ron Hubbard's favorite cigarette brand, which was Cool Cigarettes. All right, guys, that is it for me. This has been a fun trip down memory lane of this Tampa Bay Times article. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you, as always, to everyone who watches until the very end. And I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right